Welcome to MJ Radio. I'm Melinda Joy Pattison, your host, and every week we're about the business of raising the collective consciousness. So you'll see interesting people, hear interesting conversations about interesting things. This week, I'm privileged to have my friend and colleague, Amy Winn, here with me, who has been here with me before when we were the Melinda Joy Hour. Last year, in fact, during November, during Adoption Month, because that is your passion to advocate as an advocate. Because Amy has in fact been adopted. So firsthand information. And Amy, I'm really glad to have you back with me.
Delighted to be here, Melinda Joy. Thank you.
Yeah, this is so much fun because when you were on the radio show, we did get to sit in the same room together because it was pre-COVID.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. But most of this whole year, my guests have been, remote. And so when we started doing YouTube, it's like so much more fun to get to see people. And this time, my audience gets to see you.
Yay.
So it's good. Yeah. And you mentioned before we started that you wanted to talk about educating adoptive parents.
Indeed.
Correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So tell us all what you said actually right before we started, because that is a really key point. What people don't know when they bring an adopted child into their home.
Let me just preface this quickly with, for years I have been talking about adoption reform. The way we do adoption in our country is supposed to be that, quote, what is best for the child, and yet what we do has never been what is best for the child. And more and more research is now being done on the brain development. As soon as a child is born, even before a child is born, their brain is starting to work, starting to make those little connections. And we have to remember that this infant, and we're just, we're going to do a very, very narrow part of adoption today because it's such a huge part, a huge area, because we've got all sorts of other issues besides just a plain white on white adoption. But that's what we're going to start with today. And you can extrapolate from that this is the same for everybody. So start out with an infant who has been with a mother for 9 months. As soon as that infant is born, the little neurons in this brain are going crazy. It's starting to associate with this mother. They can look at the mother's eyes. They know the mother's sound or voice. They know the mother's heartbeat. And so the contention recently in the last decade or so has been, we want to get those adoptive parents right into this system as quickly as possible. So they have the adoptive parents working with a mother who is about to give birth. They have them together. They have them meeting. That they may be in the delivery room. And it has been thought that as long as the adoptive parent is now familiar to that child will be able to bond with that adoptive parent without a problem. The issue is that the primitive brain of an infant doesn't make that leap. It can't go, oh, wow, this is great, I'm getting adopted. All it knows is the one human being that it recognizes that it's lived with for 9 months is no longer there.
At a cellular level, recognizes.
Exactly. For the first 3 months after an infant is born, anybody who's had a child knows this. That child is totally dependent upon you. That child hasn't any other way to learn. And this is what the whole bonding piece is about. This is how we learn to be in the world. So if our infant is taken away from the one human it knows, even as wonderful and loving as these new parents can be, what they don't understand, and this is my main passion, what I was talking about with you earlier, is that we have to make all adoptive parents aware that they're getting a traumatized child. This child has lost all support. And so what does the brain do? It protects the baby. It shuts down. All of the neurons that should be focused with bonding with an adult, with this human who they've been with, is taken away. So they have to shut down. They're afraid. They are scared. They have no way to
So,
process this trauma.
so they're in freeze.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now they are with these new parents who have not been told that this child is traumatized. And there are very simple steps that adoptive parents can take to reestablish that bond with this baby, to reassure the baby that they are safe. But we don't tell the parents that. The way we do adoption in our country is to take this child, hand it to a new parent, and go, oh, go have fun, love your baby, everything will be fine. And so we set everybody up to fail because the adoptive parents can't figure out why this baby isn't bonding, why it's so afraid, why it's crying all the time, why it's pushing us away. And they think there's something wrong with them, or even worse, they think that maybe the mother was doing drugs or something, and so it's all the baby's fault. When a simple communication would have changed this. But the issue is that we make a lot of money in our country on selling babies, and that is what it is. An adoption is transferring legal rights from one adult to another adult. That is what it is. It's a legal transfer. It should be a very simple transfer. And yet, if you talk to anybody who was adopted or tried to adopt, it is thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. You have adoption agencies who create this whole story about this poor woman who can't keep her child, and so she needs to find another family, and they put together scrapbooks of all these poor people who want to adopt a child, so that this mother who's already under stress has to pick somebody else to take care of her baby. And all of this is being taken care of by a bunch of people in an office. There's an adoption agency. They have different stenographers. They have lawyers involved. They have all of these other pieces. But if we spent those thousands of dollars instead to help support the mother who has the baby, maybe she absolutely could parent her child, but she doesn't have the financial support because we have such a stigma in our country about about birth mothers. You know, if you ask 10 people on the street, 9 of them will say, oh yeah, she's probably a drug addict and a prostitute on the street. This baby's going to be so much better off. Don't do anything to counsel the adoptive parents. There's a great deal of loss all the way around. Adoptive parents, most of the time, are adopting a child because they could not produce their own child. So there is grief in there. There is a great loss of having their own child that we don't help them with. We don't make sure before they get this child that they have resolved that grief, that they're not trying to replace that baby they couldn't have, which takes us into a whole other realm of trying to force this baby into being a part of the family that it's genetically not connected to. And that's a whole other issue.
Yeah. Well, so what would this look like in a perfect world?
In a perfect world, we would have therapeutic agencies handling these things. We would have people counseling the birth mother. We would have resources for that birth mother. If she wants to keep her child, these are the resources that are available. So you have a choice, a valid choice. Instead, the counseling that happens now from lawyers and from adoption agencies is simply, you aren't able to parent this child. The guilt that is heaped upon this woman has already gone into having to deal with, I'm going to lose my baby, and all the pieces that go into that. If we could help her make a clear decision about, yes, I can with these resources parent my own child, or no, I can't. So let's look for the next solution. So she can have that counseling to make that decision clearly, without pressure, without guilt and shame. Then we have an adoption that is going to be easier for the mother and the baby, because this baby is not going to be traumatized in utero by a mother who's stressed. And we would also, in my world, my perfect world, anybody who wants to adopt a child should go into counseling for at least a year before they start the process, so they can deal with their own grief. They can deal with their own anger. They can deal with the shame that they feel about not being able to biologically have a child. They can deal within the couple about, if it's who is the one who can't produce, then we can deal with that piece of it to say, so that little bit of shame isn't always there, like it was my fault we couldn't have a baby because whatever. So we would deal with those to make them aware of their own issues, to help them work through those issues, And then we can begin with the psychology of a baby's brain and what they're going to get. That when this baby comes to them, these are the pieces of their brain that are not functioning. This is how you can get them to function again. These are the easy steps. I mean, we have lived in our country with Benjamin Spock's edict that you just let the baby cry and they'll get over it. With an adopted child, you can't do that. That child is already terrified. If you do not respond when that baby cries, you're just reinforcing, I'm alone, nobody can protect me, I have to take care of myself. So in all of my years with working with adoption and with working in my therapeutic practice with adoptees, I see the same thing over and over again, same thing that I lived through. There is a shutdown, there is a disconnect in our lives. For the most part, almost every adoptee I've ever met has had the same issue. We are shut down. Our frontal lobes aren't as well developed as everybody else's because we have lived so long in fear. So it's incredibly difficult for us to trust anybody. How can you trust somebody when you've been abandoned your very first moment of life? Or within the first few weeks or the first few months, whenever you have a bond with a child that is broken, it takes a whole lot of extra work by the adult in the situation to rebuild that bond. And that is what we do not tell our adoptive parents. It can be done, but they have to be given the support to know how to do it.
Well, and so this brings to mind the efforts on the side of those involved with pro-life who are out working very hard to convince women not to have abortions. And they say that they want to support that woman to have her child, and that adoption is a way better option.
Yeah, it's a lovely myth. Number one, those people out protesting at the adoption clinics or the abortion clinics don't have any motivation to actually help support those women. There's no financial support for those women. If you stop someone from walking in to get an abortion and say you have to go to have an adoption, that's not supporting the woman. That's just adding guilt and shame into the mix. It is not a solution to the issue. They go back to, we need to support everybody within this. There are more than enough babies who need homes. There are more than enough parents to love these babies and children. And again, we can get into a whole broader range of that, but it is the piece that those people who want to condemn women who want to have an abortion, those people who insist that this birth mother is incapable of taking care of this child, she's so irresponsible, she got pregnant as if she did this all by herself. There's no compassion in that. There's no supporting what is best for that baby. That is just their pure dogma, and I will stop there before I get myself in more trouble.
Well, it's really quite all right to say what's on your mind. And I meant to say that before we started. You don't, there's no censoring. No censoring. And I asked you the question.
Well, I often distress people when I make my comments about adoption is all about baby selling. But that's how it started. That is how our current form of adoption started in our country. Back in the 20s and 30s, it was still common for family members to take a child in. It's a normal thing. People get pregnant. Okay. Then we had a woman by the name of Georgia Tan down in Nashville, Tennessee, who decided she could make a lot of money as a social worker. And so she literally would steal babies and sell them to the politicians, the police chiefs, all the wealthy people in her town. And they didn't want anybody to know that they were buying a stolen baby. So they closed the adoption records. That's when all of our birth certificates got closed. We no longer have it.
I remember that you saying this. Yeah.
Yeah, you get, my birth certificate has my adoptive parents' name on it as if they gave birth to me. So I'm not allowed to know anything about my background. We only have 10 states in this country at this time who allow adoptees to have their original birth certificate, which gives them a connection with that past. That's a whole nother piece, but that's how adoption got started, and it hasn't changed. It has not changed in all of these 70 years since all of that started. We still have records closed. We still act as if adoptive parents are the parents. And that leads into their thinking that, oh, I can make this child into my image. I can make this child be a part of this family when we never can be. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that. Let your child be who he or she is.
Who they are, yeah. Is there any place in the world where they're doing this right?
Oh, yeah.
Do you know?
Oh, yeah. England, Australia. Those are the two main ones. The two main ones, and I bring them up mainly because it has only been within recent history, within the last several years, that both countries have absolutely apologized to birth mothers who were forced to relinquish their children. And they have thought about reparations. Yeah, absolutely. And they have a totally open system so that when you adopt a child, there is no separation. There is no reason why everybody involved in this cannot be together. I have wonderful adoptive families who have family vacations with the birth family. There is no, I mean, how many people can love a child, right? You've got, the more support you can have, the better.
Oh, exactly.
Piece of, you know, so often you'll hear parents saying they want to adopt out of the country because they don't want to have to be worried about this mother coming back and stealing their baby. It's like, that's not happening. It is something that is made up. And it's just like any other falsehood in this kind of situation. They prey on the fear and the insecurity of an adoptive parent to instill that kind of thing, rather than saying, you know, love this baby. Let's make it be the best it can be for this baby. Let this baby have a continuation with its birth mother until it's beginning to individuate. And then let it be totally with the adoptive family, or whatever you want to do to make that baby be secure. That's what we need to do.
So is that the key? Having completely open adoption?
In my mind, almost always yes. There are always those cases, you know, the exceptions to the rule, and those are the ones that are played up. The mother who does have a drug addiction of some sort and can't parent a child. There are those kinds of situations where it is harmful. And we find those cases more and more often within the foster care system than we do with the original adoption system.
Well, so how did they start doing it right in Britain and Australia?
Because activists got busy. The activists got busy.
Yeah.
They went after it. You know, in England in particular, in Ireland, it was so blatant. I mean, you saw the movie Wilhelmina. That was an actual way that adoptions were done. The babies were taken from the mothers were shamed, and the babies were sold to Americans for the most part. So they got them out of the country. And those, you know, after so much time had passed and so many people realized what had happened and how their lives had been destroyed, they began to band together. It was purely activism. They kept petitioning the courts. They kept petitioning the legislatures to say this was wrong. And they were able to finally bring the case before their courts and their legislatures to have this shift made.
So are our legislators are they just not listening?
Correct. Because again, the adoption agencies, the adoption market is a huge moneymaker for people. The lobbying services for adoption agencies is enormous. They have a ton of money. So they can get to their legislators and say, nope, we're not going to pass this one. And for the most part, legislators don't really know. I mean, they're not involved in adoption. They don't really know the trauma that's involved in all of this. So, you know, they think, oh, it's a little fringe issue. Well, it is a fringe issue because adoptees are about 6 to 7% of our total population. But the thing you have to remember is that if you look into youth homes, if you look into youth programs, if you look into prisons and jails, you will find a huge number of adoptees in those populations. We may be 6% in the general population, but we can be as much as 50 to 70% in a jail population. That high.
No kidding.
What does that tell you? The other piece is, I mean, this is the scary one, but I don't have a current figure, but it is close to 80% of the serial killers in this country are adoptees. 50% of the kids who have gone into schools and done shootings in schools are adoptees. This is the piece that we are totally ignoring in our country. Adoption itself is not bad. How we allow these children to grow up is the issue. Parents have to be informed of what they're getting. They have to have a full medical history from the biological family to know if there is anything that needs to be addressed as the child is raised. And we need to support them, for heaven's sakes. The other piece of it, Melinda Joy, is that adoptees are generally 2 to 3 years behind our peers in development, because we have to work so much harder at learning to trust, to have a relationship, that it's harder for us to go to school. It's harder for us to make friends. And so we're always a little bit behind everybody else. If parents understand this, they can support us in that and continue to help with the emotional growth. You know, but if we get put into a competitive family that we should be out there winning the game all the time or doing all these things that are making the family look good, it's just reinforcing for the child. It's terrifying.
Yeah. So what we call in our work, re-traumatization could be happening on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the heartbreaking thing. That just to have, you know, the money really does distort the whole process. If we would take the money out of it, if we would take the adoption agencies out of it, we would put it in the hands of the therapeutic community, you can still have networks who say, I have a child who needs to be adopted. I have parents who would like to have a child. You still can have those kind of networks, but they're not involved in huge amounts of money being changing hands to have that happen. You know, at this point in time, if you want to have a healthy white baby boy in this country, you have to pay $75,000. Exactly. How is this best for the child? How is this best for anybody? And again, this is just the small little piece of a white child being adopted by a white family. I imagine the cultural pieces of it as we get into multiple racial pieces of this. And then the whole foster thing, which is a whole nother discussion for another day.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Is one reason people go outside the country to adopt cost? Is it less actually to bring one from somewhere else?
The main reason people go outside of the country is that there's availability, although that is really closing down these days. So they can get a child, instead of waiting 2 years here on an adoption list, they can go and find a child elsewhere. But the main reason is they don't want to have any contact with the birth family. They feel like this is the safest thing for them. Instead of letting that child be a part of their whole culture, they are making them into this family only and cutting them off. Yeah. But it's not really, you know, especially if you think about all the stories you've heard of parents going over to Russia and China and so on. It's not cheap. You have to fly there. You have to be there. It's not a cheap alternative. So if we had been counseling those parents about why are you so afraid? What is it in you that has been hurt so badly that you are afraid of somebody coming and stealing your baby, and working that process out in their minds, wouldn't have this issue.
Mhm.
Again, a lot of money is being made by a lot of people having nothing to do with the adoptive parents and the adoptee.
So what is it? Why does it take 2 years?
It's just a matter of which agency you're going to. They have a waiting list. There are only so many
Waiting
babies being
list.
born, and if you specify that you want a white child, it's going to take longer.
Hmm.
If you want a white,
Well, there's the time zone right there during which the parents to be could be doing their therapeutic work
absolutely.
toward, yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
I think
So,
they should actually have therapy and buy a dog. If you can take care of a dog well, you can learn how to take care of a baby well. But it's that same kind of attention to those early needs that is so important.
yeah. Hmm. And you have, as I said when upon introduction, that we're colleagues. You have largely worked with, in your private practice, you have largely worked with those people who have been affected by adoption, either have been adopted, have adopted
Right.
children.
Yeah. And I also see this, I am very fortunate that I am working also at Tierra Nueva Counseling Center that's part of Southwestern College. And we are open to the public. Anybody who wants to come and have counseling can come. And I'm the one who's generally doing the intakes with them, the requests for services. And so often I will hear this from parents: something's wrong with my child. Something is wrong. I can't get through to my child. And as we go into this request for service more and more, it's like, well, this child was adopted. And these parents were never helped to understand why this child was going to be different. So I see it, in my normal working life. I see it in my therapeutic life. I see it with the organizations that I work with, that it's the same piece over and over. No matter how you come about it, it comes down to the fact that we do not educate anybody properly. I'm bashing the adoption agencies, but they're just doing their jobs. Nobody has actually ever gone to them to say, what you're doing is really harmful. That's part of what my passion is right now, is talking with those people to say, you realize what you're doing is setting everybody up for failure here. You need to switch this model of how we do things.
So, are you actually having opportunity to talk to those people?
This is my new initiative. This is what I'm
This is
starting
what
out on.
you're, yeah. Well, and so when a parent comes in to the counseling agency and is talking to you about their child, and you recognize at a certain point that we're talking about adopted
Mm-hmm.
children, do you encourage those parents then to get their own therapy?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And this is the hard part. I'm very fortunate to be able to talk to many classes in human development. And one of the things I always say to them is that 99% of the time when a parent comes into a counseling session, they're going to say, fix my child. There's nothing wrong with a child.
Mm-hmm.
It is the communication within the family that they have never been taught how to properly communicate on this level with a child.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, our brains don't work like everybody else's. So we have to have this other piece in place for the parents to understand.
Mm-hmm.
You love your baby. That is absolutely paramount. You also need to know that this child is going to take a lot more support. For the first few months, for the first year, however long it takes, every time that child fusses, you pick it up and you hold it and you love it so it can learn how to respond to you. It doesn't know how to look in your eyes because you are not recognized by this infant. It instantly recognizes its birth mother. You see those beautiful, beautiful, lovely pictures of mothers and babies gazing at each other. But the baby can't compute what this human is that's holding him. That's not something that's normal.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't know how to do those pieces yet until that parent holds them enough so they can learn, I can trust this person. When I call, this person comes, and that trust begins to build.
Well, and so for anybody who's watching this podcast and says, well, to themselves, well, too late. I have an adopted kid, but they're this old, and it's too late. For me to do my work, or for no, it's not too late.
Never.
Right?
Never.
Right. So it's not too late to give the child therapeutic support, nor is it too late for the parents to have therapeutic support.
Absolutely.
Right.
We're going to say, you know,
Yeah.
with parents, there are developmental stages that we all go through. And with a child who has this disconnect in them, because they have not been given that support, those kinds of things happen as we go into new developmental stages, maybe as they begin to go into grade school, absolutely as they go into high school, even more when they go off to college. Each of those are a dangerous area for us adoptees. We need extra support to know that we are safe as we go do this, that our family is behind us, they are encouraging us. And that's the piece that's so hard for parents to understand. It's like, well, my kid was just fine until he was 13, and all of a sudden he's turned into this horrible monster. It's like, well, they're a teenager for one thing, but also this is a new developmental stage. They're going into middle school. They're going into a new situation. Any new situation is scary. And the parents need to understand that.
Oh, wow, this is big work, Amy. This is big work. Where do you start?
By talking with you, Melinda Joy, spreading
which we love to do on this show. That's what we like to do. Yeah. And so what would that conversation look like with an adoption agency? What is that conversation that you would like to have with them? Let's have that right now.
Okay. My first piece would be to meet with everybody in the agency. And we would go through this brain development of an infant, a newborn, an infant, how it changes over the months and years. I mean, there are wonderful brain scans showing infants who were adopted at birth, who were given a secure attachment by their parents, and those who weren't. Our prefrontal lobes in an adoptee who is not cared for properly are much smaller than a normal infant's development. And that's part of our shutting down piece. We don't know how to do the empathy piece. We don't know how to do that connection piece because we've been shut down and never given that security. I want these people in these agencies to understand what they are doing with these babies. It's not just finding a couple that can afford to adopt them. This is all about making sure you have people who have the background and the understanding of what they're getting into. And that is what the agency should be doing. They should be doing the therapy. They should be doing the introductions to the adoptive parents about, you're going to have a child who is a lovely child, but it's going to be different. You're going to need to spend more time. You're going to need to do these things. And they're wonderful things. Deborah Gray has a wonderful outline of what, when your child does this, it means this within the adoptee world. This is how you counter it. I mean, there are wonderful resources out there to help adoptive parents. But we have to make sure that the adoption agencies understand that they're a part of doing this transfer into trauma. And so
who is Deborah Gray? Did you say Deborah Gray?
She's a wonderful, oh my gosh. She's a wonderful therapist. She's out of California, or no, Washington. And she has, so many wonderful books out about adoption. She is really one of the premier person who started in with the concept of adoption trauma, being adoption sensitive work.
Okay.
So anybody can look her up online. She's wonderful.
Right. Okay. That's so good to know. And in conversations that we've had about all of this, you have said that as therapists, it's really important to know as you're taking in a new client, whether or not, and you were very careful about how you worded this, have you ever been affected by adoption. And you're so specific about that language as needing to be in the intake.
Yes.
Whatever kind of intake a therapist does, and we all do it our different ways. But because of that, those conversations that you and I have had, I added that to my paperwork that people fill out for me when they begin to come and see me. And I think it is. I'm so glad that my consciousness was raised in that way by you and having conversation about this so that I could do that. And I do. I have had occasion where it's been yes.
And
so it's a very helpful thing.
You know, within the adoption world, for all of us, the birth parent, the adoptee, the adoptive parents, there is shame and grief and loss. For birth mothers, this is a piece that they have never been able to relieve. They've lost their child. That child is no longer with them. And they can't let go of that piece of it. But they have been shamed so much by our society. Everybody in our society still thinks these mothers were deadbeats and they couldn't take care of their child, and so they deserve to have them taken away. And after so many years of shame, I don't think I ever speak publicly when I don't have someone to come up to me afterwards and say, I've never told anybody. It's been 30, 40 years, I've never told anybody because nobody understood. And that's the piece that is so hard. So if you don't ask, these people are going to come into therapy with depression, anger issues, relationship issues.
Right.
Well, duh.
And you may never ever know.
Exactly.
You may never ever know without asking that question. And have you found in your work more often someone is coming to you because they were adopted, or because they gave a child for adoption, or because they adopted a child? What seems to be prevalent has been prevalent in your practice?
You know, that's a difficult one because we live in a relatively small community. And through support groups and so on, but people know me and they come to me. So I've had all sides of what we called the old-fashioned triad. In my reform work over the year, I was president for many years of the American Adoption Congress, part of Attach, which is another wonderful organization that really focuses on adoptive parents. This is something that is, the early days, it was all activism about the adoptees getting their birth certificates amended so they could see their real birth certificate. From there, we finally began to add in more and more birth parents who were willing to step up and say, yes, I was forced into do this, or, you know, all the reasons that back in the old days, especially, it was just horrendous what they used to do to birth mothers. And little by little, the adoptive parents are understanding that there is no shame from saying, I don't know what to do with this kid. And so we finally are all having this open dialogue in the country that we didn't have before. So at this point, everybody is open to therapy. And I see more and more of that, of people coming to me, especially adoptive parents, saying, I just thought there was something wrong with me. I didn't know what to do with this kid. Never had a child before, so I didn't know what to do. So there's a wonderful awareness becoming more widespread in our country. But for the most part, I would say still most of the therapy is for adoptees.
Okay. But what we're talking about here is stigma.
Oh, yeah.
Stigma. Yeah, just as much as stigma about any of the other things that we often talk about in our work, as there being, you know, getting therapy for any reason, there is still there's still some stigma around that. It's getting better.
Yeah.
But that's what we're talking about here.
If I could leave everybody with one piece, it is to allow people within the adoption world the chance to be themselves. So for instance, so often I have people say to me, I'll say something about, no, I don't look like anybody in my family. And everybody go, oh, well, nobody in my family looks alike. That's not true. If you look around the table on a holiday, you will see people who are sitting alike, smiling alike, eyes look alike, hands move the same way. You have similarities that an adoptee will never, ever have. So instead of trying to, I know you're trying to be kind, but you're not. You're denying a huge piece of ourselves. Let us be who we are. Let us be the individuals. For an adoptive parent, it's the same thing. Instead of saying, oh yeah, I know somebody who had a baby and blah, 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 and they give you all these horror stories. Instead, ask the parent, what's it been like for you? This child is not genetically connected to you. Obviously, you love each other. That's a great thing. But what was it like for you? Give them the chance to talk about their real experience. And for a birth mother, love that person. Let her know that you care. The pain that she's gone through to be separated from a piece of herself. And let her talk about what that experience has been. Listen to us. Don't try to fit us into this little, closed place where we're all supposed to fit in. We don't fit in. And that's okay. We're just different.
So as therapists, as therapists, because I have to take a piece of it, because as you've said a number of times, it is so big. This thing is so big. So as therapists, and as a working therapist who has added that then to my intake, so that I can know if an incoming client has been affected by adoption. What else can we do to change the culture, to affect the laws in our country, to
if you have any political activism in you at all, before several legislatures a year, we put forth bills to ask them to open records. And if, that takes a little effort to find out whether or not there is such a bill before Congress. But if there is before your legislature or before Congress itself, write to your legislators. Say, I support this bill. I support every person knowing who they are. If you talk to anybody who is saying, well, I'm thinking about going overseas to adopt, ask them why. Get them to talk about it. Suggest that they maybe get some counseling before they do that, so that they make sure that whatever happens. I mean, if you're going overseas to adopt a child, think about all the extra pieces that are added into that child's psyche at that point. They're coming to a culture they can't understand. They don't look like anybody, even remotely. Nothing sounds familiar. Nothing smells familiar. How terrifying that must be for these kids. Support that. Support the parents. Just be open about it. Just be open about it. I tease my friends all the time if they're late for an appointment. It's like, oh, we adoptees, we just can't take that because to us, it's an abandonment all over again. It may be a silly little lunch date, but if somebody doesn't show up in our cells, as you mentioned to begin with, we have that shut down, oh my God, something's wrong with me. Nobody showed up.
So Amy, you're talking to human development classes there at Southwestern, which I'm so glad that this piece is coming in, because as I was coming through Southwestern, we didn't have that piece. We didn't have that piece. I'm so glad that you are contributing that piece to the human development classes. I wonder, is there an opportunity for you to do continuing ed? I know that you are an LMHC, so you cannot offer CEUs under your licensing, but under an LPCC's license, you could offer that. And it would be so good. It would be so good.
Well, I would love to do that. And we were starting to have conversations with the college when the whole COVID thing came. And so we're doing our community lectures. And so that's all been in flux. And, at this point in my life, Melinda Joy, I just have stepped away from my activism with my the American Adoption Congress. So I'm just taking a little breather on all that and really trying to rework my pieces instead of just educating people about an adoptee perspective. This piece of how we do this whole process to begin with is more important. And so I am really working on reworking that. How do I reach out to those adoption agencies, as you were suggesting? How do I get to them now that I no longer have a national platform where I could go to national conferences and bring this in? I need to start in our state. I need to start in New Mexico. But from there, I'm hoping that this will be the piece that will continue on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me just say to you as we finish our conversation here, that if I can, if you need a letter of recommendation, a recommendation in any form, to, you know, I would love to support you in that way. No matter where I am or what I'm doing, I can do that for you. I can do that. That is something that I can do. And I can continue as I encounter new clients, I can continue to have this piece, this informational piece, as we begin to work, so that I know more about what they're up against,
Right.
as they come.
So
So
the world, my friend. Thank you.
I just thank you for your work in changing the world, because you are changing the world. And I say to my clients, doing that as we do the work that we do together, we're changing the world.
Yes, indeed.
As we have this conversation here, we're changing the world. And this is our privilege and our responsibility. So I'm just grateful to you for spending this time with me today. And I'm going to say to my listeners now, thanks for joining again with MJ Radio for this interesting conversation with this interesting person about this interesting and such important topic. So I'll see you again next time.